Hi, it's me again. And I have more information about Orion Renewable Energy Group and their proposed Prairie Sunlight Solar Project. And just like last time, I showed my work. So, what does Orion say about this proposed Franklin County project? Well, lots of things. But two things that I'd like to touch on is this new wildlife friendly habitat and landscaping installed by the project. Okay, and development of the Prairie Sunlight Solar Project began in 2018 with conversations with landowners and local stakeholders. 2018? How come the rest of us only heard about it in 2024? Thanks to the Register of Deeds and the fact that recorded leases are a matter of public record, I have received copies of all of the leases. And we will talk more about that in detail in another video because I have so much that I need to share with you. Now let's go on to their wildlife friendly habitats, shall we?
So they say this whole thing has been done with a wildlife study, but here's what we got. Poor deer stuck in the fence. Its jaw's all broken. It's been hurt. Its shoulder's messed up. It's terrifying.
Okay, that was dark. So what I'm going to do is go over just a few of their frequently asked questions. I have a few more that I'd like to touch on in other videos, but those are going to be a lot more focused on just those few issues. So let's start with who is Orion Renewables? It just is basically your who am I that you'll find in any other website. It says that they've developed more than 8,000 megawatts of clean renewable energy projects in the United States. I mean, that's pretty impressive, right? On their website, they have a list of all of their projects, and here are several of them that they've done. I just kind of took a snippet of them. One of them is still owned by Orion, but what concerns me is why does Orion not own the majority? I mean, I'm seeing Next Era, Shell, Castleton, Ares Management, Pattern Energy, Vectren. Why not more Orion ownership? Here's even more. Avangrid, TransAlta, EDF, Portland General Electric, Pacificorp. None of these are Orion. But I'm betting that Orion made a bunch of promises to get these passed. So this one kind of made me laugh because it just seems a little arrogant, but definitely funny. Why does Orion offer frequently asked questions? Well, it's because of the misinformation. Google-based opinions coming from bloggers, paid activists, pseudo-publications, and political groups that no one has ever heard of before, which is obviously a key indicator. Now, I'm not saying that every single blog post that you're going to see is going to be anti-big solar. It's kind of a nice split 50-50, but you've got just as many trade publications coming across from the pro-solar folk that are trying to be convincing as you'll find from these pseudo-publications. To hear Orion say it, you would think that the only thing that you would be able to dig up that was not just sunshine and rainbow solar was going to come from somebody wearing a tinfoil hat. But here we are with the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal warning us about Chinese hackers aiming to wreak havoc on the US critical infrastructure and saying that the world's biggest solar companies work with the Chinese government. I mean, that's not really cool. There's more. The Spokesman Review, which is the Spokane, Washington newspaper. The Harvard Business Review. We've all heard of Harvard. And the Fox News Channel. I mean, that's definitely somebody that nobody's ever heard of, right? Here's a fun topic. How much new tax revenue will Prairie Sunlight Solar bring to Franklin County? It starts out with if the Prairie Sunlight application is approved in 2024, not 2025, because they are not able to promise this kind of money if they do not have federal tax dollars to back it. And the only way they're going to have the federal tax dollars to back it is if Biden is reelected. If Trump returns to the White House, all of this goes away. And they're saying this is, of course, going to help our way of life here in Franklin County. Like there was ever anything wrong with our way of life in Franklin County. One of our young volunteers asked a question at the open house that Orion held last Thursday. Why do these figures keep changing? We've taken screenshots occasionally just to see where things progress with this Prairie Sunlight Solar website. And, we've had expected tax revenues start at 145 million, continue on at 145 million, and then the day before the open house drop to 115 million. Now, the investment in Franklin County just keeps surging. It started at $185 million, then it was $250 million, and finally it sat at $400 million. Now, it's always been 185 megawatts of capacity. Now, they started out with saying that's enough clean energy to power 37,000 plus average homes. But then they got a little bit more realistic and realized it would only produce enough clean energy to power 26,000 average homes. So Orion keeps talking about all the ways that they're going to flood the Franklin County economy. But first, we need to address the tax abatement in the room. Every single project that they have ever developed has required a tax abatement. Now, they say it doesn't require a tax abatement, yet they always request one, and the project is actually dependent upon it. Now, sometimes they don't necessarily do a full abatement. They'll do what's called a pilot program, and what that is payment in lieu of taxes. So the company gets to decide how much money they want to give the county, and then they don't pay taxes. But the issue is the county is not the one that gets to decide where that money goes. The company does. So the company now gets a vote in the development of the county and how it spends its money. It's almost like having Orion sitting at the planning and zoning and the county commissioner's offices. So this project has obviously taken a lot of effort. I decided I was going to call it a night. And when I came back, there was no longer a frequently asked questions, and most of the information altogether had been removed from the Orion website, which is fine. Thankfully, my son is very tech savvy, and he introduced me to something called the Wayback Machine. It's an internet archive, and it basically stashes old versions of websites for you to come back and look at if you ever need them. And we did. So let's get back to work. So here's another one. Will private land be preserved by the Prairie Sunlight Solar Project? Here's where they get really honest and they don't even realize it. They say yes, more than 1,000 acres of private land will be preserved for future farming. They use the word heritage and legacy. But more than 1,000 acres, the project is set to be 2,900 acres. So wouldn't they say more than 2,500 acres or more than 2,000 acres? They say more than 1,000 acres will be preserved for future farming. So what happens to the rest of it? Like I said, we're going to get back to those leases in our next video. But I am going to touch on one thing. About half of those leases have an Exhibit B attached to them, and that is a purchase option. So what it essentially means is if the project is approved and construction is set to begin, the leaseholders will no longer be leaseholders. They will be sellers. They are selling their Kansas farmland, and in some cases their house, to the power company from California. Here's another good one. What will happen to my utility bills after the Sunlight Solar Project becomes operational? They go on about increased demand, lower supply, traditional energy sources closing, And then they talk about how clean energy is so much more affordable, but then they're super honest and they say, we cannot say with certainty how this project will impact your residential utility bill. Now, the Denver Post reports on Xcel Energy planning to spend $15 billion to boost renewable energy. They're spending that $15 billion for leasing property for wind and solar. $10 billion of that is going to come through tax credits under the Inflation Reduction Act from Joe Biden, but they've got $5 billion left of expenses, so they're asking for a rate increase of 2.3% for its 1.6 million electric customers. That would increase the average customer's bill by about $10 a month. And it's not just Denver. We've got issues in Maine. Charlotte, North Carolina agreed to a 25% price hike for a solar farm because they said the equipment costs were rising, and without a 25% rate hike, the project would fail. And this is not a project that is just in the planning stages either. This is a project that already exists. Portland is giving an example of a self-inflicted problem. So in January, they raised rates 18%. It was enough to cause people to decide that they needed to move away from Portland. I mean, 18%. And so then they need another rate hike for 2025 by 7.4%. And the reason why? Because they need to build out grid-scale battery storage to handle all of the extra solar and wind energy being produced in Oregon. So they created a problem, and now they want the ratepayers to come up with the solution. So I didn't touch on all of the frequently asked questions, but I have some questions of my own, starting with, what does a company from California want with our prime Kansas farmland? How long does Orion plan to own these leases before selling them? And how many times will they be sold before we've reached the decommission stage? And who will they be sold to? And now that we know that it's not just leases, but actual purchase agreements for farmland and homes, who will those be sold to as well? And are they bound by the same promises made by Orion if it's not just leased land, but also now that they would be one of the largest property owners in the area? How does Orion plan to address the flooding that's known to occur in these large-scale solar power plants? I mean, when you rip out all of the trees and the vegetation and cut out the topsoil, you're going to have issues with flooding, especially with this clay soil. So what is their plan? Let's talk about weed control. How do they plan to stop that? It's Kansas. Weeds and grass grow in the weirdest places. They fill our ditches, they grow in our fields, they even grow out of our potholes. So what's their plan? Is it just going to be aerial sprayers with Roundup? I would just like to know what their plan is for that. Now, this is a topic I'm going to address when we get into the leases, but will this affect the land use of the neighboring parcels in any way? So say I am surrounded on 3 sides by solar panels and my hay baler starts on fire. What if that fire turns into a grass fire and it gets into the solar field? Now, it's not going to be safe for me to go in there and try to fight a fire in a power plant. So who is responsible for that? I mean, we're farmers out here. This is farmland. Shouldn't that be the priority? Does this energy generated from our Kansas fields and our beautiful Kansas sun even stay in Kansas? Because we've heard so many different things. We've heard that the project will be sold to the highest bidder. We've been told that the energy will just go into the grid and that will be sold to the highest bidder. We've also been told from landowners that this project has been put together by Evergy. So if that's the case, Evergy would be one of the largest landowners in Franklin County. Think on that for a minute. And now that we know that half of this project will be purchased by the power company, what protections does Franklin County have that Orion will keep their promises after the project is approved? I mean, it's one thing to keep promises because you're a leasing member of our county, but if you're one of the largest owners, well, you're going to want to have a seat at the table. Orion talks of heritage and legacy like they understand what that means. Our heritage is land that's been passed down for generations and will be passed down for more generations. Our legacy is in this ground. It's the hard work, the blood, sweat, and tears, and yes, the sacrifice made by hardworking, honest farmers who want nothing more than to put food on the table. This is the backbone of America. This is what we want to protect. This is our heritage, and this is our legacy. Not this. Any day, give me fields of wheat or corn or soybeans, pasture ground for our cattle to roam, not fields of glass. We are Franklin County. We're an agricultural community. Our backbone, our legacy, our heritage is in our soil. Please don't allow it to be covered in glass. We can always go forward and decide collectively that it is time to cover our rich farmland in renewable energy. But we can't go back once it's done. Once we have allowed people to sell their ground to the power company, to decimate it for the use of the highest bidder, we can't go back, and we will never be the same. We don't want to be the generation that ruins it for the generations to come. This is why we fight. Please help us protect our way of life in Franklin County.